Welcome to our webinar on algorithms with Year 1 and 2. The focus of this webinar will be branching and iteration. Algorithms 2 is the fourth webinar in a series of 7 and the sequel to Algorithms 1. If you have not yet watched Algorithms 1, we recommend you take the time to watch it and then return to this one. It is assumed knowledge for this webinar. We have a series for F-2, Years 3 to 6, and Years 7 to 10. My name is Meredith Ebbs, and I have over 25 years experience teaching in a range of contexts. I have taught in both primary and secondary from foundation through to Year 10. I've also worked with the University of Adelaide on the CESA Digital Technologies project, upskilling teachers with teaching of digital technologies. In a past life, I also worked in the corporate sector as a computer trainer and a technical writer. I would like to introduce Bianca. Hi, Bianca.
Hi, I've taught for 7 years in the primary space and love digital technologies. I then completed a Masters of Education Digital Technologies at the University of Sydney before joining Grok in 2022. This webinar will cover a recap of version 9 of the Australian curriculum. We will define and discuss branching and iteration. We will share some pedagogy for teaching algorithms in your primary classroom before sharing lesson ideas. We will also talk about digital tools that you might choose to use to cover this curriculum, as well as methods for formative and summative assessment. Our goals in this session are to review Algorithms 1, to recap the Australian curriculum version 9, to introduce and investigate branching and iteration, explore lesson ideas for your classroom, explore digital tools, consider assessment opportunities. We will focus on tools, activities, and assessment. In the previous webinar, we covered what's new in version 9 of the Australian curriculum. We talked about sequencing, we talked about pedagogy for teaching digital technologies, digital tools for teaching sequencing, lesson ideas, and also assessment opportunities. So we will start today by talking about the curriculum. There are a few key changes with version 9 of the Australian curriculum. Things that are important for you to know include that there has been a split from version 8.4, with foundational prep now having their own content descriptions, elaborations, and achievement standard. Another change is the name change for ICT capability to digital literacy. The content descriptions in version 9 provide more explicit statements as to what needs to be taught, and there are improved elaborations. The achievement standards provide explicit statements of what needs to be assessed. Please review our previous webinar, Algorithms 1, for more detailed information. The 3 decision-making blocks of algorithms are sequencing, branching, and iteration. We focused on sequencing in our previous session in Algorithms 1, and this session will focus on branching and iteration. Just to recap, sequencing is the step-by-step ordering of statements, regardless of the conditions. Branching is when a decision is required, and iteration is the repetition of a set of steps or instructions. The content description for Years 1 and 2 includes following and describing algorithms, sequencing, and branching. Branching is about making decisions. The content description also includes iteration. Iteration is repeating a task. Iteration is introduced in Years 1 and 2, however, it is not assessed. This is an example of the achievement standard not assessing everything that is taught. This content should be introduced in Years 1 and 2, but is not assessed until the next level, which is Years 3 and 4. It is a stepping stone to learning, but there's no expectation about performance for this concept at Years 1 and 2. Branching is part of the Year 1 and 2 achievement standard. Branching, by definition, is when a decision is required. Branching is an algorithmic expression that involves making multiple yes or no decisions based on defined conditions and the data provided. Here we have an example for you, a very helpful graphic to determine if you need to use masking tape or WD-40 to troubleshoot some problems. Last webinar, we introduced this activity to clean your teeth. It is an excellent example of branching. There are quite a few decisions to be made when cleaning your teeth. These include which toothbrush is yours? Is the lid on the toothpaste? Are your teeth clean yet? Each time you have a decision, you are directed to an alternate step. This webinar, we will spend time focusing on both branching and iteration. There are many examples for branching in everyday situations, and this is an excellent starting point for students in Year 1 and 2. For example, is it cold today? Students can go outside and check to answer yes or no. If yes, grab your jumper. If no, you do not need your jumper. This is a very simple example. Students can be extended by adding additional questions, such as, is it raining? Yes or no? Yes, grab an umbrella or raincoat. No, you don't need to do the next step. Iteration is the repetition of a set of steps or instructions in an algorithm or program. Being able to identify patterns in everyday life can help learners to identify patterns when programming. Repetition is such an important concept in developing programming skills and is commonly used in algorithms to help simplify processes. Whilst it is introduced in Years 1 and 2, remember it is not expected to be assessed. There are also many other examples for repetition. A great unplugged lesson to introduce iteration for students is a dance routine. Often there are repeated steps, usually for the chorus, and students can act out the repeat or the loop. Other examples include practicing a spelling word 5 times or throwing a ball back and forward with a partner 10 times. These are simple repeat actions that can be used with students in Years 1 and 2 when first teaching iteration.
As a further introduction to this topic, we would like to share a clip from a popular sitcom, The Big Bang. In this video, the main character Sheldon is trying to work out how to make friends with Kripke, so he can get time in a science lab that Kripke timetables. He also has been to the public library. He's borrowed a children's book on how to make friends. Sheldon has made a flowchart to help him learn the process of making friends. It illustrates the use of branching. When a decision is made, there is a yes or no response. At one point, Sheldon gets stuck in a repeat as he doesn't like the interests that Kripke has. So Howard adds a loop counter that only allows several repeats. Otherwise, Sheldon would have continued to repeat, what else do you like? Let's have a look at the video.
You're just in time. I believe I've isolated the algorithm for making friends.
Sheldon, there is no algorithm for making friends.
Well, hear him out. If he's really onto something, we could open a booth at Comic-Con, make a fortune.
See, my initial approach to Kripke had the same deficiencies as those that plagued Stu the cockatoo when he was new at the zoo.
Stu the cockatoo?
Yes, he's new at the zoo.
It's a terrific book. I've distilled its essence into a simple flowchart that will guide me through the process.
Have you thought about putting him in a crate while you're out of the apartment?
Hello, Kripke. Yeah, Sheldon Cooper here. It occurred to me that you hadn't returned any of my calls because I hadn't offered any concrete suggestions for pursuing our friendship. Yeah, perhaps the two of us might share a meal together. Yeah, I see. Well, then perhaps you'd have time for a hot beverage. Popular choices include tea, coffee, cocoa. I see. No, wait, don't hang up yet. But what about a recreational activity? I bet we share some common interests. Tell me an interest of yours. Really? On actual horses? Tell me another interest of yours. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I have no desire to get in the water till I absolutely have to. Tell me another interest of yours.
Uh-oh, he's stuck in an infinite loop.
I can fix it.
It's interesting, but isn't ventriloquism by definition a solo activity? Yeah. Tell me another interest of yours. Is there any chance you like monkeys? Yeah, what is wrong with you? Everybody likes monkeys. Hang on, Kripke. A loop counter and an escape to the least objectionable activity. Howard, that's brilliant. I'm surprised you saw that.
Gee, why can't Sheldon make friends?
All right, Kripke, that last interest strikes me as the least objectionable, and I would like to propose that we do that together. Tomorrow. Yes, I'll pay. All right, goodbye. All right. Time to learn rock climbing.
In this section, we will discuss some pedagogical tools for teaching digital technologies. Use, modify, create is one approach that can be used to teach students algorithms. This teaching approach uses scaffolded learning, which assists students by reducing their cognitive load. This learning takes place on a continuum, and the use, modify, create progression is offered as a framework to use. During the use stage, we engage students with algorithms they are already familiar with, such as brushing their teeth or tying their shoelaces. The teacher demonstrates how to break these tasks down into step-by-step instructions. The second stage, modify, allows the use of open-ended questions that promote critical thinking, asking students to identify, why is this step important? What if we change this step? What if we put this step before another? The create phase provides opportunities for students to design their own algorithms for simple tasks or games. Use, modify, create is an iterative process, and students should revisit each of these phases, the use, the modify, and the create phase, with different algorithms of increasing levels of complexity. PRIM is another approach that can be used to teach students algorithms. Predicting by reading and tracing code is helpful for students to understand how algorithms work. Other research has found that adapting existing code can support students to develop the necessary problem-solving skills to design their own algorithms. The PRIM approach combines this research into a model with 5 key stages. Firstly, predict what the code will do. Next, run the code to test their predictions. Investigate the structure of code. This provides an excellent opportunity for class discussion and for pairs or small group work. Then students modify the code, and finally they make a new program. PRIM is a pedagogical approach that will become more relevant in years 3 and 4 as students begin to engage in visual programming. At the year 1 and 2 level, students are able to make predictions from algorithms presented to them. They're also able to run or act out simple algorithms, such as a dance routine or programming a B-bot or a blue bot to move from one spot to another using a simple code provided to them. When you plan a novel study, you usually read the book first, at least one chapter ahead of your students. So when teaching with digital technologies, it's really important for you to be familiar with the concepts that you are teaching. You should run through an activity and practice with any digital tools that you want to use before you use it in the classroom with your students. You only have to be one activity ahead, but it's really important to do that. After completing your preparation to teach, if you're still feeling unsure, one suggestion is to invite a teaching colleague to team teach with you. Another alternative for our students in the lower years is to have a buddy class, so students from an older grade to pair up with your students. If you choose this option, pair programming with the older student being the navigator and the younger student being the driver is an excellent approach to use. The older students should be instructed to give instructions only when their buddy needs assistance, using their words to help navigate the driver to solve the problem. You might choose to give open-ended challenges for the buddy groups to solve collaboratively, or you may have specific skills in mind. For example, you might have each pair of students produce a project that includes 2 loops. Or students might create a game where they have to identify the middle sound of a word, such as the short E sound in bed. When learning to follow directions, some students may struggle with directional language. They may need posters with symbols and words to remind them of directions. Visual reminders for left and right can be very useful. It is quite common for beginners to move digital tools like blue bots or B-bots just one position or step at a time. So you can help students plan out their B-bots movement by using the printed cards with the arrows from the top of the B-bot. You might also like to have an algorithm for students to copy with their B-bots, blue bots, or Ozobots. This algorithm can be projected onto the screen using the arrows for students to follow. Further, students can predict where their B-bot will end up or what their Ozobot will do based on an algorithm that you have given to them.
In this section, we'll give you some ideas for teaching branching. So branching is about making decisions. I'd like you to press pause for a moment and write a procedure to fill a bath. So now that you have written your procedure, you might like to have a look at your procedure in the context of the symbols that we use in a flowchart. Flowcharts use blocks for particular functions. The decision block is a diamond. The rectangle is a process or action. The arrow should point to the next action or decision. Press pause again and correct your process to use some of these symbols. How did you go? Did you find the decision for is the bath full? If you don't continually check the water level, your bath may overflow. This is our example. Yours may look similar to this. And this is where the decision is. There are actually other decisions in filling a bathtub, but we don't usually consciously think of those decisions. So you may have included decisions about adjusting the water. You may have included decisions about turning the hot and cold tap on, and you may have included decisions for turning the taps off. Consider the decisions your students make in their everyday life. What colour pencil should I use? Am I still hungry or thirsty? Is my body the right temperature? If they're cold, they add clothes. If they're hot, they might remove their jumper, change clothes, or have a cool drink. These types of activities can be used to model branching in your classroom. Keep the examples simple and real world for your students. Avoid complicated examples that have too many decisions. This example is about getting dressed. Discuss with your students who's ever put their shoes on first before putting on their pants. What sorts of problems would they have if they did that? Can they put their shoes on before they've put their socks on? This looks like a simple sequence of steps, and students probably can place them correctly immediately. But what decisions do they make when they're getting dressed? What would happen if you presented this to your students in the wrong order? You could discuss with them the problems that they might encounter. So for our discussion, I've illustrated some of the decisions you make when you're getting dressed. And this would be far too complex for year 1 and 2. But the decisions for getting dressed are quite complex, but we don't realise we are making these decisions because we've been doing it for so long. Watch a toddler getting dressed, and you will soon see what happens when you haven't mastered the sequence. Getting dressed has many decisions involved, and the order is very specific. With year 1 and 2, you could teach this by just talking about the order we need to put our shoes and socks on.
This section gives some ideas for teaching about iteration, both plugged and unplugged activities. The subject area of mathematics aligns well with iteration. There is a year 1 and year 2 content description for algebra, which includes recognising, describing, and creating patterns. Repeated addition is a perfect alignment to mathematics, where students can use beads to represent a pattern. For example, red, 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 blue, red, 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 blue. Dance and music, part of the arts, is another opportunity for cross-curriculum lessons, combining iteration from digital technologies with dance, as students choreograph a dance where they need to repeat steps, for example, the hokey pokey, and also with music, where students combine sounds in repeated patterns, for example, percussion instruments, clapping and stamping. There is also an opportunity to align with digital literacy, and you could use the app GarageBand that can be used on iPads or smart devices to allow students to create a simple piece of music. GarageBand allows students to add instruments, use preset patterns, add drum loops or tracks, and play the guitar as part of their music piece.
In HPE, students can choreograph a dance where they need to repeat steps. And Bianca introduced the idea of using the hokey pokey. In music, students could be making repeating patterns with percussion instruments. Here's an example where students have choreographed a dance for some bebots. The video goes for 50 seconds. While the video is playing, can you pick one bebot and write down the instructions to program this bebot to do the dance? You could use the initial 4 directions or arrows. I've placed the arrows down the side of the page because we're looking at the sequence. Everything is reversed for left and right. You probably agree that that was a difficult task, and some of you may have watched the video a few times. And it's possible that you didn't catch all the symbols, and that's okay. The purpose of this activity was to try and identify some repeating patterns in the movement of the bebots. You might use dancing as a hook for learning to follow, describe, and teach iteration. You could give your students a list of directions, and then they have to program a robot to follow the instructions. Some more advanced robots may have sensors that can be used to program branching, but this isn't necessary in Year 1 and 2. Students may like to choreograph their own dance. Remember, this would be beyond the achievement standard for Year 1 and 2. And of course, they would need to document their ideas and trial them. Then they can put several bees together to create the dance. Pick music that has a strong 4/4 beat and put it on repeat. When planning this lesson, you might like to trial the music with your own dance to ensure the timing will work. The link on the screen will take you to the video if you would like to watch it again. Now press pause and look at the symbols that you've used and circle the repeating patterns to show iteration. If you chose a bee in the front row, this is the pattern they followed. So you could do this type of activity with Year 1 and 2 by providing them with the arrows or the letters for the pathway that the bees followed. And then the students can copy that and make their dance. This is the repeat that you were looking for. So in the front row, there was only 2 repeats. This is the choreographed steps with the repeats. And this is what it looks like if you replace the repeat with the ×2. If you chose a bee in the back row, this is the solution for the back row. You've got your repeats, 3 this time. And this is your summarized code. You can see it's more efficient to not have to write every single step in the process.
Last week, we introduced iterations by following instructions to create 2D shapes. This is a perfect example of repeating patterns and an unplugged lesson that combines mathematics and digital technologies. This idea could also be used for a lesson on identifying repeating units. If this is too difficult for your students to write their own instructions or steps, you can give them the instructions and they can identify the repeating unit. When you are learning songs, You can use the language of branching and iteration to talk through verses and choruses. This is a fun example to illustrate how songs use branching and iteration. A musician might argue this is not technically correct, but you can see the arrows indicating repeats and the branching for each new verse.
Digital tools are available to teach branching and iteration in your classroom. This first idea is Scratch Junior. Scratch Junior is a free app for tablets. It's a digital tool that can be used sequencing and iteration. Scratch Junior is not available for desktops and will provide a solution for people who don't have tablets later. This tool allows you to integrate algorithms into other subject areas by creating animations about your subjects you are studying in class. If you go to scratchjunior.org, you can download teaching resources, and there are also lesson ideas. You can see here along the middle of the screen, there is a bar of coloured buttons. These coloured buttons are the menus, and when you click on each of these buttons, it will display new blocks that can be used for those functions. This is an example of one of the printable activities that can be found on the Scratch Junior website. There are 9 activities that you can use to teach yourself how to use Scratch Junior. They can also be printed and used as activity sheets with your class. I've used these with Foundation through to U2, and the pictorial format is easy for them to follow. Incidentally, I've also used these with students in the primary school who needed differentiation and were not ready to proceed to more difficult coding activities. This is an example of using Scratch Junior to teach iteration. Beginning users will select repeating blocks and make a long chain like in the top row. In this example, we have 4 blue blocks repeating to move Scratchy the cat across the screen. Scratchy the cat is also known as a sprite. The current code will make the character or sprite move across the screen for 4 steps. When this happens, you might ask your students, why have you used so many blue blocks? Is there a way to reduce the number of blocks? If you don't know, you might need to prompt them to click on the orange menu and see if there is an orange block they can use. There is one orange block that can replace 3 of the blue blocks. Press pause and look closely at the orange blocks. Which block do you think represents a repeat or loop? If you chose the orange block with the arrow, you are correct. It has a 4 on the block, which means it will repeat the blue block 4 times. You can click on the bubbles with the numbers in them and edit the number to change the number of iterations or repeats. Both of these sets of blocks do the same thing, and when coding, these would be both correct. It is just more efficient to use the looping block as it reduces the amount of code you have to build. Once students become more familiar with Scratch Junior, you can implement challenges for them to build digital literacy. This is an example of a game for identifying shapes. Once they've finished, you could share it with a kindergarten class to review their knowledge of shapes, and this will also help build digital literacy in kindergarten. You could use the same code and change the sprites to different themes: living and non-living things, word games, number games. For example, identify the words or pictures with an initial sound, and the students can use the library to create the images, or they could draw their own.
Another great option, if students don't have access to iPads or tablets, is to use the Scratch platform. So this can be downloaded offline, or alternatively, students can have their own accounts. If you have not experienced much coding, you might like to practice these activities before teaching them, or ask a colleague to team teach with you, or perhaps use the buddy class idea. It is very appropriate for Year 2 students to modify an existing code. When we think about the pedagogical approach, use, modify, create, students in Year 2 could be modifying a simple Scratch game that you have created. A helpful tip for using Scratch is being familiar with the project you want to teach so you can anticipate any problems students might face. So we encourage you to spend some time on the platform before you introduce it to your classroom. This is an excellent buddy activity if you have students in years 5 and 6 that can buddy up with your students in your classroom. They love to visit and help the younger students play in this space and create algorithms on the Scratch platform. This is an example of the support material available off the Scratch website that can be used to support your students using the Scratch interface. This card shows a simple repeat code that could be used with one of the musical instruments. For students in Year 2, you might like to have a project created with the relevant blocks already dragged into the workspace, and then students can modify the code to create the algorithm shown on this card or another algorithm that you have written. In years 1 and 2, students are exposed to iteration, but it is not assessed. So Scratch is a great way for students to explore in this space.
Code.org is another online tool that is useful for this age group. It has some simple visual coding activities that introduce iteration. You can create an educator's account and create logins for your students. The logins can be picture-based, and you can print the cards to help with the process. If you do this, you can allocate specific tasks to each student, which allows for differentiation. I have used this platform with years 1 and 2, and I did have to teach students how to log in. But by using the picture login and the cards, it makes the process quite easy. Remember the buddy technique we talked about earlier? It's a great way to introduce new skills like this. If you prefer, you can just open the course without logging in. The one pictured is the pre-reader course, and work through the activities. Using this method does not require login, but the progress won't be saved. You could also use the resource as a group activity, and students solve the problems together using the classroom projector or several devices in groups. Activities like this are great for digital literacy and need to be included so they can identify symbols common in browsers. NAPLAN is now run online in the beginning of Year 3, so these activities really support readiness for online tests. There are a range of courses you can choose from on code.org. The pre-reader course was pictured on the previous page. Courses B and C are suitable for 1 and 2. Remember, the years are just a guide, and you could introduce the pre-reader course in Year 2 if your students have not yet had much experience with coding. All 3 courses include the concept of iteration and refer to them as loops. To teach branching, you will need to review some of our unplugged activities that we've been presenting throughout this webinar.
We will now move on to talk about assessment. When assessing, always refer back to the achievement standard. The relevant sentence for algorithms is they follow and describe basic algorithms involving a sequence of steps and branching. You can use formative assessment to assess for learning and also for as learning. Pause the slide and consider which words are the verbs. What actions are you assessing? How might you confirm these skills have been attained? Compare your answers with your colleagues and see if you agree. Here are the command verbs in red. Follow and describe are the main verbs we are assessing. The parts in blue are what you are assessing. They can follow and describe a sequence of steps, and they can follow and describe branching. By the end of Year 2, students must be able to follow and describe a sequence of steps and branching. Students are introduced to iteration or repetition, but these are not assessed for Years 1 and 2. This is some of the methods of assessment that you would be familiar with. You'll be gathering evidence for formative purposes to monitor student progress during all of your lessons. Summative assessment, evaluating students' performances against the standards, can be formal assessment tasks, could be photos of students' work during a classroom activity, and are often also your observations of your students. At Years 1 and 2, a video is a valid assessment instrument for both formative and summative purposes. An example might be to include photos of code that students have created or modified on the Scratch Junior app. You may also record a video of your students explaining their code.
One of the difficulties when teaching digital technologies is assessing work samples. Has the work sample met the achievement standard? In the next few slides, we've got some ideas for you on what you might expect. In Australia, we have a 5-band model for grades. Student grades must be assessed in an A to E format. You may refer to these grades differently in your context. Schools and states describe the levels using different terms. For example, in relation to the expected standard, you may hear terms like below or elementary for E, approaching or developing for D, at the expected standard or competent might be used to describe C grade. And then for B, you might hear above or achieved. And A, they are well above or beyond the expected standard. These grades should be allocated from assessment using the achievement standards, so students have consistency across the years. When assessing, we consider understanding, knowledge, skills, and the achievement of the command verbs in the achievement standard. Here is a sample rubric to evaluate students approaching the Year 1 and 2 achievement standard. They're still developing their skills and have not met mastery. Because we have multiple command verbs, we have to consider each of those verbs for achievement. We also have the element of branching and sequence of steps, so they need to be considered as well. This is a sample rubric to evaluate students who are working at the expected standard for the Year 1 and 2 achievement standard. They may be referred to as competent or at the expected standard. This would be expected by the end of Year 2, but it is possible for students to achieve this before that time, especially if they're having repeated exposure to the different curriculum areas, as we've illustrated in this presentation. The link on this page takes you to the rubric we presented in the previous webinar, Algorithms 1. It is a more comprehensive rubric, and it is only a suggested method for assessing students in Year 1 and 2, and it could be modified and should be modified to suit your context. This is one example of students documenting their understanding of an activity. Prior to completing this English task, the teacher modelled the writing and the class created a sample of work which was then displayed for the students to follow. These students were given their own task and then asked to document their findings. This documentation could be using words or symbols, and there was a word bank on the board to assist with spelling. The task was move the B-bot from one word to another that have the same middle sound. This task allows the assessment of a sequence of steps, but does not include the opportunity for branching. Prior to assessing, read the achievement standard and ensure you are familiar with the command verbs you need to observe and all parts of the relevant sentence. While the activity in the picture is a great application for B-bots and a fun activity for English rotations, this does not fully meet the achievement standard. Skills that are missing in this activity include knowledge of branching, follow and describe branching, and some students still need more practice for iteration and some branching. This work sample looks at documentation of understanding. It shows the students use multiple trigger blocks, the flag and on touch. It also shows they understand the size and show blocks. The red block at the end with the sun with a 2 on it is a type of branching, and at the conclusion of that code, the program switches to page 2. The student has written about what they know in the symbols and the words using pictures, and they've also written about the purpose of the project. This Year 2 student has achieved follow and describe algorithms involving a sequence of steps, but more evidence is needed to assess branching. It is important to unpack the achievement standard and check off each of the skills. To confirm this student's understanding of branching, it will require another activity. This activity assesses student knowledge of branching. Students were given pieces of paper with decision blocks and process blocks, and they were asked to arrange them in an order that would show their understanding of decisions made for weather and clothing. The skills that were covered in this and the student has demonstrated in this work sample, they can describe the purpose of a project, they can describe the algorithm using pictures, they can follow branching, and they can describe branching in class conversation. There was 2 examples of branching. There's one for the weather, and there was one for what are you wearing. But the bottom parts, they're all sort of not really structured or ordered. So they haven't really demonstrated they can follow the steps fully, and they haven't truly demonstrated their knowledge of branching because there's errors in their work sample. But what needs to be considered is, was this task misaligned with the student's literacy level? And consider assessing this child again verbally. Once assessed again, it was found this child did not have a complete understanding of branching and did need some help to redo the task. This is an achieved work sample. This child has demonstrated that they understand branching. They've got multiple arrows to the multiple options that would be suitable for the tasks. And they could also describe the algorithm using pictures and words. They included labels and pictures, and they've grouped their labels together logically. They could describe the sequence. They could also follow the steps in class conversation and describe branching in class conversation. This child has demonstrated an understanding of the achievement standard for year 1 and 2.
Here are some links for further reading into the research behind the teaching of algorithms and computational thinking. There are also some Grok Academy resources listed that you could use in your classrooms when teaching this concept. We've included the Wombat printable, which is an unplugged activity. We've also got the robot dance, where students create a dance routine based on a set of robotic movements. And this lesson plan includes a printable robot with movable arms and legs. The DT at School workbook has 16 activities for students ranging from foundational prep through to year 6, and also Monster Maker, which is a course on our platform where students drag and drop blocks to write their own program. They learn about sequence and ordering and create fun monster characters. There are many lesson plans available to support your teaching of algorithms in the classroom. Meredith and I have found a few links here for you for activities that we particularly love. The websites that you can find activities on include code.org, scratchjunior.org, Code Club Australia, and the Digital Technologies Hub. There are some fantastic courses that you can complete to gain further skills. These include our Scratch courses on our platform, also the Code Club Australia online course. There are also resources for teaching Scratch Junior available, and the University of Adelaide offers their MOOCs, which are online courses designed to support Australian teachers with implementing the STEM-related subject areas. Our next webinar in this series will be on privacy and security. This is a new concept in version 9 of the Australian curriculum, so please join the Grok team to find out more about teaching this concept, and also the excellent resources that Grok has just produced for this content area. These include a digital detectives card game, accompanying PowerPoints, a password workbook with teacher lesson plans. These have all been designed for students in foundation or prep through to year 4. It was officially announced on the 4th of October, but in case you missed it, this is the 5-year partnership between Grok and WiseTech Global to make learning digital technology skills available to every Australian student, teacher, parent, and adult learner for free. Grok's mission is to educate all learners in transformative computing skills, knowledge, and dispositions. This partnership with WiseTech removes the financial barrier for schools in using our resource, as well as allowing us to expand our team to continue to support schools, teachers, and learners. Please contact us if you need help or if you want any additional information. The best email address is help@grokacademy.org, and you can scan this QR code to get access to the Grok Academy platform.